Good morning, good evening, good day, greetings and salutations. Welcome, I would say, as one of the first things that we like to start off with here when we're saying hi, hello, and hello again to the Safe Room featuring Security Side Quest. My name is Tristan Watty, and I am somewhat of a security practitioner who helps customers accelerate their journey to the cloud in a secure manner. And today I'm joined by the great, I always say mysterious, and I always say legend, the one and only Russ. And Russ,
hey,
say hello to the people out there.
Hello, people out there. How's it going?
See?
I'm excited about this episode. I'm very excited about this episode.
So excited. And why are you excited? What is your background, Russ?
So I did do some threat hunting. I think that's kind of one of those areas where everyone kind of gets into it relatively early. I think that's kind of like something that most security practitioners learn about their environment by threat hunting. So I'm very excited. I like threat hunting. I love the expert guests that we have. I love the whole hunter motif. Even though I really think it's more like scouting than hunting, but that's a personal thing.
Yes, and there's a couple of things I wanted to dive into with that. But first, we have to say good afternoon and hello, Luke. Thank you. Cydney, hello. And Roman, hey, we're cycling through. Hello to all of the people joining in. And feel free to continue saying hello to us and saying where you're dialing in from, where you're tuning in, where you're listening in, or just plain on joining us from. But the second poll for today that I would want the chat to communicate and say is, what is your favorite candy? And this question I pose to Russ to start off with.
I am a bit of a sweet tooth. I gotta go with Skittles. It's my favorite. It's my go-to. Definitely. What about you? What's yours?
Skittles. It's always a tough choice for me because there's so many out there. So how do I not date myself at the same time also say my favorite candy? No, but I'm pretty much I would say Snickers type of person. I think that's the right balance, right? Because I talked about peanut butter and hamburgers on a previous show, but I think Snickers would be where I stay today. And I'm curious on what the other people say in terms of candy, because we can dive deep. We can go into the candy you eat every day or the candy you find at, your grandparents' house or something along those lines. There's always those candies. So,
like those really chalky little tablet things.
Yeah, those things, or the no-name ones that you don't know where they come from. They just kind of spawn when you go over to certain people's house. You're like, where do you find this candy? And
yeah, like circus peanuts.
Yeah,
who eats those?
Well, the funny thing is, do you ever remember or recall or see anybody go to the store and say, hey, let me get some circus peanuts? No, I don't see it. But Snickers, Skittles, we do see. But we digress because we can go on all day about this. So I think we're going to jump in. So to jump in, I think it's this poll season, right? And what I mean by that, Russ, we have a poll that we could share out to start off and kick us off, right?
Absolutely. We got a poll. Let's do it. So everyone just enter your answer 1 through 4 into the chat. So that way we can see everybody's responses. So what is your preferred hunting grounds for threats? What is your favorite go-to place? Where do you go first? Do you start with network traffic? Do you go to endpoints? Do you go to log analysis? Or, of course, cloud infrastructure?
Yeah, there's a couple of places that we can start off, including, saying hellos and, happy to become a threat hunter. I would say if I were to start off, and as people enter their numbers in the chat, 1, 2, 3, or 4, I would have to go through number 3, the log analysis. Read at heart. Just diving into seeing what's wrong and why the bleeps and bloops are happening within the environment. I think that's why I'm kind of a log type of person. So 3 for me. What about you, Russ?
Couldn't agree more. I'm definitely gonna have to go with 3 as well. But there is lots of places that you can go for threat hunting and getting more data. I mean, this is more of like a which do you feel most comfortable or which do you prefer? So I'd go with 3, but I think they're all really good answers, and I think that you can not only hunt but also just learn more about your environment and your organization by looking through all of these. So
yeah, and it seems like we have a lot of people at the second half of it. A lot of 3s and 4s. A lot of people in the new frontier of cloud infrastructure. So let's
people do not like networking. They're just like, no.
There's no networking people in the chat. So, but we digress. We continuing on this thought, on this trend, on this path. I would say that we have a great topic for today, and that topic is what? Some people gave a couple of spoilers in the chat, but it's around threat hunting. So today's episode overview is going to start off with what is threat hunting? And then some of the essential components that go into threat hunting. And what may those maybe? Maybe some data collection, some analytical capability, hypothesis. When's the last time you've done the scientific method when looking for threats? Well, you'll find out if we do that today. And spoilers, maybe not. But the other thing that we'll get into is customer use cases and start to dive into how we correlate these threat hunters to threat hunting to get to the place where we need to be. And I think the place to start, because this is such a broad topic, and this is the intro, this is the 101. For the sake of this conversation, we are the noobs coming in. So what we have to do is find a couple of people to guide us. Just like Sun Jin Woo, where we need to be S rank, well, we have to find out what an S rank is. So we gathered 2 S rank individuals today to help us level up one step at a time, and one quest at a time, and one threat at a time, I would say. So let us bring to the stage our guests that we are going to talk and share the love of threat hunting for. Welcome to the stage, Cydney, Rahul. Thanks for joining.
Hello. Hi, good to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and thank you for joining in as our S rankers that come in today with all of the knowledge. Can you first start off by introducing yourselves and what you do on a day-to-day?
Sure thing. So I'm Cydney. I work on the customer incident response team with Russ and a lot of our team members who have been on the show as well. My primary focus is learning lessons from security events on the customer side of the shared responsibility model. And we research what we saw, we share those lessons learned and make our processes better for other responders in future, helping other customers in the future. So that's a little bit about me.
Hey everybody, Rahul Gautam. I'm a security and compliance specialist SA at AWS. I've been with AWS for a little over 7.5 years now. I used to be a part of the premium support team earlier, where I would see customers ring us about incidents in their cloud environments. And I would often see a misconfigured bucket, a misconfigured AWS account, roles, and I always felt that there should be a better way how customers can prevent these things from happening. And those things can be actually addressed through threat modeling as well as threat hunting. So I'm more than happy today to talk a little bit about threat hunting, how customers can use some of our AWS tools to effectively threat hunt. Nice to be on the show.
Yep. And you said a lot of words that I think speak to our hearts, right? Threat modeling and threat hunting. Threat modeling, we can go off on a whole tangent on. And I think there will be a little bit of it sprinkled in today, just when we're talking about threat hunting kind of process, procedures, and the introductions. But I think the place to start, and I ask this, is what is the most unusual security finding you have encountered in your environment, in your customer's environment? What have we seen? And this is open to the stage.
I'll go first. Unusual. That's an interesting question. So our expertise is customer side shared responsibility model, as I mentioned, but we don't work in customer accounts. Customers come to us when they need like a second pair of eyes on something, or they want to be advised about how to move forward. I kind of want to twist the question a little. Can I do that?
Twist away.
Okay.
That's what we're here.
I would say the most usual thing that we see leading to privilege escalation, and so I'm gonna explain why I answered it this way, is overly permissive IAM principals that specifically have the ability to escalate their privileges, like the IAM create user, attach user policy, attach role policy, permissions policies. There are others as well. This is just a glance. And if that permission exists on a user that didn't need to have it, then we can see some unusual stuff. We can see misuse of legitimate resources. We can see creation of unauthorized resources. So that's my answer to your unusual question: is usual thing, least privilege, leading to variations in what might be done.
Cydney, you just stole my idea for the demo. That was what I was going to present as a demo, but yeah.
Oh my goodness! No, at least I didn't demo it right.
That's okay. We're just bringing it up early, give you a little teaser of the demo. But yeah, that's a great answer, and I'm so glad you brought that up, Cydney. That's very true.
Yeah. And we always like to have a little bit of spoilers, right, as well. We're all those type of people that also, what I like to say when we spoil is, hello to all the people that are giving thumbs up and saying greetings and all of those good things, and putting in snakes and happy faces, all of those different items. I always like to take a second to pause and say hello. And you are great as well. So when we think of the unusual activity, I'll share my story and see, as a person who used to receive a lot of SOC alerts, one of the things that we noticed at 2 a.m., there was always an influx of alerts for, a vulnerable, let's say, server within the environment. But then it would disappear at about 2:30. And going through investigating what's going on, well, it turns out that this was an on-prem environment. So when the janitor would come in, they would turn on the lights, which would kick on a server because it powers up. And that would cause a bunch of alerts to generate. And then when he was done, shut it off. So that was my unusual story that was fun to kind of track down through the network utilization and things of that nature. But yeah, that's my one.
That's really fun. That actually sounds like the beginning of like a podcast episode, like Darknet Diaries or something. And you're like, and what was the janitor doing? Stealing everything. Exfil.
He was mopping. Yeah, he was mopping and causing danger. Yeah, you gotta add that little tagline in there. That's what gets the people in, right? So
reminds me of the SpongeBob episode. Like he's like taking out the trash at night. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. And if we were to add that in, so we gotta pose this question and kind of move it to a certain person on this. Is one out of four, and spoilers, not Russ or Cydney. It's going to be to Rahul. So with that setup that we just gave you. So threat hunting, what is it?
What is it?
I'll go to threat hunting, but do you mind if I shared my example of the unusual finding that I have seen?
Absolutely, please.
Yeah. So I while I was working in support, I saw this very weird use case where a customer would offer pre-signed URLs to his users and to upload some documents and verify those documents. And this particular bad actor on the internet would request more than hundreds of pre-signed URLs every day and keep uploading objects into the bucket to increase the cost of that particular customer. And it was very tricky because how do you stop somebody from requesting pre-signed URLs? Because the business of the customer was to have his own end customers upload documents to their S3 buckets.
Yikes.
So illegitimate use of legitimate resources.
Yeah.
Good intentions with that.
All right. With that, let's move to what's threat hunting. Threat hunting is actually often confused with incident response and forensics. So let's kind of understand what forensics and incident response is, and then move on to what threat hunting is and how it is different from these. So incident response is basically responding to alerts, responding to automated scripts that are running in your system to detect anomalies and restore your critical infrastructure to operate in an optimal manner, right? Forensics, on the other hand, is more about once an incident has happened, how do you dive deep into what actually happened? You try to apply some guardrails, you try to set up a very safe environment where you can investigate. Say, for example, you've noticed a vulnerability on your block storage. So you want to isolate that particular block store and run some kind of tests, some antivirus scans, some malware scans to identify what actually went wrong. Threat hunting, on the other, also both of these are more reactive in nature, where something has actually happened and then you're performing an operation to identify what actually happened or restore it back to its business, right? Whereas threat hunting is more a proactive approach, where an individual using his knowledge and the tools that you give him tries to identify attack patterns to see what was actually missed by these automated detection systems. Now, for a matter of fact, no system in the world, no automated system in the world can detect 100% of attacks or 100% of anomalies. Some will always go through, and that is where threat hunting actually comes into the picture. Threat hunters kind of are the people who would be catching these anomalies that are passed on, that go undetected by the automated detection systems, right? So it's a more proactive approach, wherein an individual using his knowledge, using threat intel, and his knowledge about, say, attack frameworks, tries to identify anomalies within a system or a cloud environment.
So there's a lot that goes into that, right? Because you have to have knowledge of the systems. You have to have knowledge of where to look. Because if you take AWS, you have CloudTrail logs, VPC flow logs, GuardDuty logs, all those items that generate a lot of bits of information, bits and bytes with that. So I think that is a good overview to say is they kind of have to understand what's happening within the environment to some extent, right, in order to dive in. And then I guess they get into the tool side of that as well, right? When they're doing threat hunting.
Yes. So the most important, there are three important factors that comprise any threat hunting process. The first one, as you rightly mentioned, is data and logs. Unless you have data, unless you have logs, you cannot figure out what's actually happening in your environment, right? So there has to be a strategy by which you're collecting logs from all your systems, from all your applications, and then also storing them in an optimal manner. As systems are growing, your storage costs also start increasing. So there has to be a strategy on how you can effectively store these logs, but also be able to query these logs when required. Right. So one, very important, is collecting these logs, and two is a tool, an analytics tool, a query editor, something using which you can query these logs. Right. And third, of course, is the human factor of it, where a human with his intelligence, with his experience and skill, tries to correlate different activities which can be unusual, depending on any of the frameworks, like say MITRE framework, to identify something which could be anomaly or a malicious attempt. Right. From AWS perspective, we came up with a product called Security Lake, which solves the collection of data and optimizing the storage of that data for our customers. Right. Using Amazon Security Lake, you can optimize how you store that data in a specific format. Because say you have multiple SaaS providers, you have different firewalls, you have licenses from different firewall providers. Now, each firewall provider would be generating logs in a specific format. you cannot have a person run or have a look at these logs individually. You want to have like a holistic view of all the logs from all the providers. So Security Lake solves that problem by collecting and storing logs in a specific schema, which is standard across all firewall providers. Right. It helps you run analytics on top of these logs. It helps you kind of have build visualizations using which you can quickly catch any anomalies, and you can also reduce your costs in terms of if a log has been stored for say an year or so, you do not really want to pay too much for them, and then you can shift them to lower storage classes to save your costs. Yeah.
Yep, and that schema you mentioned is OCFF,
Yeah.
right? So the Open
Yes.
Cybersecurity Schema Framework. You have to say all one word for it, the magic to happen a little bit, right? So that, I also take this pause to say hello back to the individual saying hello in chat. And we also have a Snickers saying it's nice. And we forgot to ask the most important question. If we take that one pause out, Rahul, Cydney, 1 second or less. Favorite candy? I know I just threw a curve.
Green tea. That's the only answer I have. That's so lame. I'm sorry. I'm bad at answering questions.
No worries. Green tea Kit Kats, we'll say. How about that?
Yeah, actually, like anything matcha. That's my answer. Love it.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah. Anything based on hazelnut.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's a good
So
one.
the Rocher candy and that family. So yeah. So we just had to take that digress and say hello and thank you. Good taste and cheers. So I think we all sit a lot. So that's always always a good thing to have. And also say hey. Again, Luke, saying hey. Thank you. Thank you for all of the hellos and the highs and all over the world. We like to take that pause and say it. But we digress and go back to Security Lake and kind of posing the question, a little ad hoc. When it comes to Security Lake, Russ and Cydney, I know Rahul, you mentioned Security Lake. Have you used it before? Have you seen it in action? Have you seen what are the benefits that we're seeing? A little ad hoc question.
Yeah. So, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I have used it and seen it used as a log aggregator. But I would love to see what Cydney has to say.
I was gonna say pretty much the same. There's a lot of benefits of being able to get all of your logs in one place whereas having logs in disparate sources, especially if it becomes critical that you need to quickly look at the contents of those logs. Being able to look between not just the AWS management plane, like CloudTrail event history, which we do a lot, but into different sources, and then having those in a common format can be really powerful.
Absolutely. Especially with the common format when you're looking to add all of these different log sources. I mean, we were just talking about how many different ones there are. I mean, once you're starting to talk about networking logs and, cloud networking logs versus on-prem networking logs, and then your endpoint and logs, and you have all these different, different log sources, and you're trying to be able to search one-stop shop, like, log aggregator, SIEM type of thing. It's almost critical, I'd say, and I don't really know of anyone that doesn't have some sort of log aggregation tool in order to be, in a modern cybersecurity, organization. So
exactly. And as incident responders like Russ, I'm sure you could speak to this as well, is sometimes the limitations of what we're able to see that may have happened in the account. It comes down to the logs. So an incident response, like, definitely. And it doesn't have to be Security Lake, but we're AWS, so we're saying Security Lake, but some kind of log aggregation tool is really powerful.
Of course.
And I would say you haven't heard from that person because they're still looking through their logs, so they haven't had time, to come back and talk to you about it. So
Exactly.
yeah. But Rahul, if we dive deeper into kind of understanding log aggregation and Security Lake, what are kind of some of the next steps? What do we have to think about?
I'll answer that with a customer problem that I have heard from a lot of customers now. So a lot of customers use some kind of a SIEM solution to aggregate logs from different sources, different cloud providers, on-premise, from AWS as well. And often they run into capacity issues at the SIEM. So, if say, for example, a SIEM says you can only ingest 50 GB of data a particular day, or you have a license only for 50 gigabytes. So if your log sources are your logs are growing, you have too much data, then you have to shell out extra money. There has to be a way by which you reduce that price by storing your logs somewhere and being able to query them on demand, right, instead of loading them into the SIEM. And Security Lake solves that problem, as we launched something called a zero ETL integration with Amazon OpenSearch. So using Amazon OpenSearch and the zero ETL integration that we now have, you can on demand scan for past events without loading the data into Amazon OpenSearch. So what this does is it gives you results quickly and also saves your cost on on the SIEM side, where you'd be initially loading the data into the SIEM. Yeah.
So we actually have an interesting. So we actually have an interesting question. If we could just have you answer this, Rahul, that would be great.
Yeah. So is threat hunting something to look mostly by an internal team in an organization or by external parties while doing penetration testing? What's the scope? Threat hunting, in my opinion, should always be done by an internal team, because it's not something which is static, not something which needs to be done only, say, once a year or twice a year. It's a continuous process. It's something that needs to be done proactively every day, where your threat hunters use their knowledge to identify unusual behaviors in your environment. Does that answer?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think it's also sometimes tough to define threat hunting, accurately, because it is such a big topic, and it is something that, is done in so many different ways. So this threat hunting in general can be something that is exclusively proactive, right? You're searching for whatever. So say you have a hypothesis, like, I think that our Active Directory is not as secure as it could be, and maybe we have a compromise. Let's look through there. And then on the other hand, it can be very reactive. It can be related to an incident where you can hunt for further signs of escalation, privilege escalation, or lateral movement. Especially when you're talking about multi-account type of compromises. But it could also be completely based on threat intelligence. So maybe we've gotten a tipper from the threat intelligence team that says, hey, we have this threat actor group that we've been following. They're very engaged in our industry. This is something we have to look out for. And then the threat hunt team can go through looking, whatever it is, through this threat actor group TTPs or what have you. So there's a lot that can be done with threat hunting that kind of muddies the waters between different functions and different teams. So that can be a very difficult question to answer.
I would also quickly add that there's also, when it comes to external, that's when you start to get to bounties and things of that nature that organizations might have. And you would preferably want to do a lot more internal threat hunting, just because if external, then the organization would have to pay that individual or company or something along those lines. So I think to demonstrate this a little bit more, maybe we can talk through and kind of see some architecture, Rahul, if that works out on your side.
Yeah, I have a small demo, very similar to what Cydney was speaking in the beginning about privilege escalation. If I can bring up my screen.
The coincidence, right? Rahul and we met right before this show, honestly. And it's funny that we bring up one of the same things. Like, that highlights the importance of what we're seeing at different layers of the business.
Yes.
All right. So let us take that second and go there to the screen. And we see a bunch of trees, which is always nice.
I'm just trying to move the image so that I can show the example architecture.
Yeah, sounds good. And while you're doing that, we'll continue to say hi and hello to everybody. Thank you for joining in. And from India, from Mexico City, from Kenya. Oh, thank you for joining in today as we talk about the great topic, which is threat hunting, which we have up on screen. So back to you, Rahul.
Yeah. So this is a very typical, might sound very trivial, but something which we see very often in AWS. As part of, premium support, I've seen this happen almost on a daily basis. So I'll just explain what the scenario is, and then I'll take you to Security Lake, show you a few queries that I run to identify, what's happening, right? Starting off, say there's an ABC corporation and they've hired a contractor to do some coding, write some pieces of code for them, and they give a development account access to this particular individual. You must have noticed that everybody likes to get started quickly, and often an administrator access is given to these individuals to just get them started on AWS. Now this individual, he's paid poorly, so he wants to make some extra money. He tries to read through some of the internal documents available from ABC Corporation to see if there is a privileged account where there is some production data that he can get access to, right? So he makes friends within the company, tries to read some documentations, and it identifies that there is a test account where all of his code and code from every other developer in the company is tested before it goes to production. So after having found this particular role in the test account, he performs an STS assume role operation to get access to the test account first. Right now, within the test account, he sees some sample data on which the application is tested, what is stored, and maybe there is some sample PIA data on which his code is being tested, but he's still in the hunt for a gold mine. Right, sample data is not something which will fetch him anything. So he again performs the same operations, tries to do some reconnaissance to see if there's a production environment from which he can get some data out. And then he comes across this one account where there is an S3 bucket containing PII information from ABC Corporation's customers. It contains their SSN numbers, contains their credit card numbers, their names, addresses. So what he does, he switches into a role that he has got, through reconnaissance, and downloads the credit card information from this high privilege prod account. Right, and he gets access to this data and sells it on dark web to make those extra bucks. Right now, how do you use Amazon Security Lake to kind of catch this entire anomalous behavior? How you can figure out that something unauthorized is happening, right? So I'll perform all these operations right from the contractor switching into multiple roles, and then how we can detect this using Security Lake. Going back to the console. Yep. Yep. So that's my user. I'll just confirm it again. Yep. So that's my user who has been granted administrator access into an account which was created for him to run his code. So he then goes ahead, does a switch role into a low privilege account, a test account first. Yep. If you can see now, the user has successfully switched into the test account, this account that I mentioned here. And then he again tries to switch roles into the production account. Yep, he's now into my production account, having assumed another role there, right? So now he runs some reconnaissance to see what's the data inside, what S3 buckets are there in this account, and comes across this bucket which says PII, right? So he then tries to see how many objects are there, what kind of data is there, what's the total size of this bucket. He gets some information from there and sees that there is a text document which might contain PII information that he can sell on the dark web, right? He then goes ahead, downloads these objects. Yep, he successfully downloaded it, and I can show it to you. There. He gets access to all this information, which he can now download on his machine, copy on his machine, and sell it on dark web to make those extra bucks. Right? Plain and simple. No rocket science. Very typical privilege escalation example. Yeah. Now let's move on to, so I have security lake set up in this environment where, logs from all my accounts, all my AWS accounts are being sent into a specific account. And I'm going to be using Athena to query logs from security lake and show you what results I can get. Right. Now, as a threat hunter, I know that I have some context about the cloud environment that my company ABC Corporation runs, right? I know what role chaining is expected and what role chaining is not expected. I know that there are applications that might be accessing some information from cross-account S3 buckets, but I also know that there is no individual that is required to perform these role chaining, right? So I run a query. I've already written a query on Athena to save some time for us, and then I run it to figure out what role chaining was performed by this user, right? So Athena queries the security lake to fetch logs and says that there was a demo user who performed an assumed role operation and went to th role A on my test account, and then this role was again used to assume another role into my production account. Right now, this should start clicking, in my head that this wasn't expected. This is not something which is, usual in my account. So there's definitely some kind of fishy activity going on within my environment, right? Now you want to know what operations were performed by this particular role, right? So I run another query to see what was done by this role. Sorry, I was in the wrong region. My bad.
Yeah, happens more often than not, right? I started in this region. I ended up in Ireland for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, actually, I ran all of this in AP South 1, so yeah. So you can see that particular role that was assumed by the threat actor performed a list objects first, where I was, first looking at what are the different objects available in this bucket. And then I performed a get object operation where I downloaded the PII information, right? I downloaded this file. Yep. Now, once I have this information, my next step would be to, block this access right away. So that is where, the respond part of threat hunting comes into the picture, where I go ahead, reduce the permissions of that user, maybe fire him, apply some guardrails. Yep. So that, and I prevent it from happening in future. Yep. So that was a small demo that I had to show.
Yeah. And I think that you hit upon a couple of key points, right? In order to do some querying, in order to figure out what's happening. And it touched upon a lot of the key points of what threat hunting is. And there was a bunch of questions in the chat of, first, the interesting comments and where everybody was tuning in from. But they started to go into how AWS services can help in the threat hunting process. And I think what I would do for this is throw it to Cydney. What AWS services can help in the threat hunting process itself?
Yes, absolutely. So I actually saw this comment come in a bit ago, and I was like, okay, like let's hold that comment because that's perfect. That's what I'm going to talk about. So there are several AWS services that use open source threat intelligence and AWS threat intelligence to perform the action of proactively looking for potential security issues in accounts. I phrased that very carefully on purpose, and we're going to go into it. Because when defining threat hunting, hunting implies proactive. I think anybody could agree on that. But then once we go a level deeper, it's like, well, what does that hunting actually mean? Where should we be doing the hunting? And it gets all kinds of vague. So I'm going to attempt to clear a little bit of that of just looking at it through an AWS lens of how AWS services perform proactive searching. I think this is an interesting topic too. And so I'm mostly going to talk about GuardDuty. I'm sure many people in the chat are interested or maybe familiar with GuardDuty. Please let me know in the chat if you already are, if you're an expert, if you're not an expert, you want to learn more. And so, okay, I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. So going into GuardDuty, there's all different sorts of findings in GuardDuty that are generated based on different log sources in your account. And GuardDuty works in a couple different ways. There's a few different findings. But one of them is looking for sequences that individual is normal, like S3 create bucket, tons of create bucket operations in a day. But if you start looking at, and I don't know a specific GuardDuty finding pattern off the top of my head, so I'm going to make this one up. But let's say in a ransom scenario where there's a login and then there's reconnaissance for IAM permissions, and then there's listing buckets, and then we're immediately copying objects or deleting objects. Well, that sequence might be suspicious. And so what GuardDuty does is it takes sequences like that and it compares it with open source intelligence as well as AWS intelligence to proactively say, hey, AWS customer, you might want to look at this. And that's how we get to a finding. So let me go into the GuardDuty finding console. But before I do, anybody in the room kind of have thoughts on that opening?
That's a great opening. And this really does go into some of our previous episodes, which were around automation and orchestration. So loving it.
Awesome. Yeah, let's jump into it. So I have run a simulation in this account where CloudTrail logging was disabled. And then there were some other EC2 instance findings that we probably won't have time for today. But if I go into the GuardDuty findings tab and go to this one, CloudTrail trail was disabled. What GuardDuty said was there was a disabled trail operation, and like that's not normal activity in an account. And so you can see and this isn't real, by the way, just in case, access key ID and question for querying in CloudTrail event history. You can see the exact API. You can see the IP address that did it. And you can see the first seen, last seen. So this will help you filter down when investigating. One way that CERT, the customer incident response team, leverages GuardDuty during investigations is it gives you a really good place to start. So if the customer says we're seeing suspicious activity, we're not sure if we're having a security event, we get the username, and this then we'll immediately go to CloudTrail event history and start looking around. And then we can look at different log sources depending on the workloads that are running and the resources that are impacted. So that's a bit about traditional GuardDuty findings. And I'm sure many in the chat are already familiar. Something exciting that GuardDuty released in December is attack sequence findings. Now, I'm going to share a different tab that kind of talks about these because I don't have one generated. But essentially how this works is it combines GuardDuty findings already with the MITRE attack framework. And let me bring this up actually. Be able to see it. And when there's a sequence of multiple actions with signals, and With the MITRE attack, we go into a certain kind of attack sequence. So we look at, let's say, we were talking about IAM, so let's look at IAM. This is compromised credentials. So this is saying, customer, these exact credentials in this finding might be exposed. You might want to take a look. And this goes a level deeper than traditional GuardDuty findings, where it's looking at more sources, including AI, ML-backed learning. So I'll pause there. Let me take a look at the chat and see what the room may have to say about what I just showed.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the chat, they're continuing to say hello. And then they're also saying to hunt for potential threats. There is continuous scanning for open search and everything else is in this paragraph. So from an application perspective, do you think GuardDuty can help out with that piece, or do we need additional components?
I don't know that I'm prepared to talk about tools for applications. So Russ, please feel free to jump in if you want to. I look at things from an identity perspective and permissions perspective. Whereas if, and I'm not discounting the question either, like application and vulnerabilities and scanning is very powerful and important. But I guess my point there is like eating the vegetables first, where it's like, do we have least privilege in place where if there was even like just defense in depth, like if they were a level past the application, is there permissions to actually do anything on that principle? But Russ, please go ahead, because I know you have thoughts. I know you do.
Well, so my thoughts go back to another reoccurring theme from every week is it's totally contextual, right? What kind of application are you running? What software are you running? What's your architecture look like? What did you decide in your threat modeling? Did you decide that this is, maybe a little bit riskier and you decide to have a higher threat hunt count or like scheduled activity in order to address that? I mean, it's so very specific to your situation. But for the most part, when we're talking about like application security, I'm going to think of the servers themselves and start thinking about Linux logs and audit-D and all these different things that I can be looking for unusual behavior. So I hate to say it depends, but it's kind of our only answer in cybersecurity because everything is so contextual. So it's hard to kind of give advice when, you're not trying to be so general that it's almost useless advice, or be too specific. And then you start getting into like specific use cases or whether or not this applies to you. So yeah, there's definitely a lot that can be done as far as application security and how you want to, I guess, organize and set up your threat hunting program. Is that something that you have a dedicated team for? Is that something that you're able to have your SOC analysts do when they have downtime, if they have downtime? What is the function? What are you trying to do? And, how are you trying to do that because of your environment? So yeah, I just, as a whole, in threat hunting in general, all of those are very set, depending on your hunting plan and your methodology. It just keeps going as far as like the different, variables inside of that. So yeah.
Exactly. And I want to take the question in the chat real quick about high signal to noise ratio. So yes, this is something that we hear from customers. And so GuardDuty has built in the ability to filter findings and also set up suppression rules for the activities that you're saying, no, this is normal for us. Like if you're anybody in the chat that you do threat hunting, you might be doing stuff in your account to simulate or replicate activities that you're like, no, I want this to look suspicious. That's the point. So you can set up suppression rules and filtering and things like that. And before we switch gears, I just wanted to talk a little bit about just kind of frame this conversation too, where we're looking at the customer side of the shared responsibility model, and AWS services are secure by default. And so the scenarios that we're bringing up are They're misconfigurations of resources that were created on purpose generally, or creation of new unauthorized resources with a exposed access key, for example. It's if you don't have that initial access point and you're kind of eating your security vegetables and you're working through things, the more that you can do that, the better. But I just kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit because I know when we're talking about threat hunting, it can be easy to kind of get lost in like what layer are we talking at, and this is why I prefer looking at it from an identity perspective, because there has to be an identity with permissions to get started in the account, period.
Yeah, and those are really good points to that. Is when you're thinking of misconfigurations, kind of a lot of that stems from speeding up development and trying to implement a bunch of tools into the environment all at once, because all these do good security work, so I should just turn all these knobs and switches and grant from an identity perspective, oh, this one needs a role, and this needs a role, and this needs a user account. And then as you start to grow as an organization, you notice that those roles and accounts are never evaluated over again. And if we go back to that application question is, all right, there's different pieces that you can perform, like maybe running something like Prowler in the environment to see your highs and the criticals, or leveraging like Splunk on the AWS cloud in order to do some application-specific monitoring. But you also bring up a really good point when it comes to the configuration aspect and kind of knowing the environment. I think this is where we take that step back and quickly talk about some legends, because as SideQuest legend has it, there was an individual at one point in time in the history of the security interwebs that was in the spot of not knowing 100% of what they were doing because, hey, I'm just trying to get things done. So if we were to frame this in the context of maybe, let's say, the individual is in a fintech company, 1,000+ serverless applications we'll throw at it, and they have evolving threats happening within their environment, and they're trying to figure out, what services should I use? What pieces of information should I really dive into? And I think this calls for the SideQuest board in a real rapid-fire manner. And for you first-time joiners, the SideQuest board is just a visualization of, hey, you have your AWS environment, you have your storage, your precious storage. And we take a second, a pause, and look at it. And then we go over to our AWS environment. And if we were to kind of look at a little bit deeper, we have some individuals that don't have authentication that are trying to access our AWS environment, and we have our authenticated user who is trying to just protect their environment and figure out what's happening with all the security alerts being generated, all the different items. So we take this pause with that context. And this question I pose, Russ, I will target you first, is what keeps you up at night from a learning perspective, a threat perspective, an incident perspective? What keeps you up?
I mean, I hate to do this, but everything. I mean, okay. Everything does. The alerts. The in the middle. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, but alerts that or just common attacks that we know about. Like, how do I do that? You know, that's what I want to answer so I can get some sleep. Is how do I do the basics really well?
Yeah, and that's an important part, right? Is the basics. And what are the basics? Is it alerting? Is it the configurations, to Cydney's point? Is it leveraging the tool set like Amazon Security Lake, like Rahul was going through? And while we're on our SideQuest journey, we're starting to figure out, okay, what tools can we use? And I think a lot of it starts with what exactly we were talking about. Leveraging something like GuardDuty within the environment as I start to zoom in a little bit. So if I take that dramatic pause to say, if we're leveraging GuardDuty, maybe we can detect what is happening with these individuals trying to ping and search and go to our environment to do malicious things like say hello. And also maybe just throw hearts into the buckets. We don't know. Or will we if we leverage something like GuardDuty? But essentially within this side quest, what we're trying to speedrun and figure out is maybe in conjunction with GuardDuty, we have some lambdas, or we have a step function. Maybe we can increase and have some automation that we can start to go through that we can start to figure out how we deal with the challenges. And the challenges are what? Well, if we have a lot of serverless applications, ephemeral environments, log volume, permissions, right? Those are the couple things that pop up in our heads. So I pose this question to Rahul. What's your biggest pain point when it comes to security alerts? What have you seen be customers' pain points?
It's very simple, to be honest. Uh, most breaches that I have seen, most customer incidents that I've seen that can be prevented is by applying the most simplest of things, and that is MFA. Right, something which if every customer starts applying an MFA, then I think we can reduce the number of incidents by a great margin.
Great response. I think the entire cybersecurity industry just did a little clap. You know,
We all stood an ovation, right? And it started to think of that. And I think I also pose the next thing to continue the ovation and the stand and clap as we have the 4-minute countdown. And I think this big item comes to when we're side questing identity, which kind of takes away the individuals on the board, right? And Cydney, you're coming from the identity perspective, the permissions perspective. So if we were to put identity on the board, I would say that kind of pushes attackers off to the side. And what I mean by that is now there's identity in the picture. Now you kind of have to take a step back and look at everything, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that orchestration piece, right? Like, AWS IAM Identity Center is new, and it's for orchestrating that very thing. And what's interesting about it is you set up with your organization Identity Center users, which are actually roles in each account. And so that adds a layer of, it makes it a little easier to orchestrate permissions across all your accounts for your different people. Sorry, I'll stop nerding about identity. Yes, Tristan, to answer your question.
Yeah. And I think the important part to consider as we're going through the side quest board is sometimes it doesn't fit perfectly because the out of the box sometimes has to be configured to your target state security strategy, your outcomes, and your business needs. So if you have 1,000 applications, there's some tuning. And with tuning, I was going to say with great tuning comes great responsibility, but does it? Right? We take that step back. I had to think about that for a second because there's so many items to consider, so many pieces of the puzzle. And as we quickly go through the side quest board, we also have to think about everything that people are saying in chat. And if we have time to do certain things is the most important part. And when you're coming to the threat hunting perspective, I think that's a really important part to consider is the time to do something. Can we reduce that? Can we reduce the mean time to resolve something, the mean time to detect something? And talking about leveraging services like, Security Lake, what Rahul's mentioned, or GuardDuty, with all the AI ML built into that to correlate all these different items, I think is an important place to start. And speaking of a place to start, I think we're at a place to end as well. So we have 1 minute. We got lost in the threat hunting kind of cave, but I think we found our way out because we had 2 great S-rank threat hunters come and join us to talk about the greatness, which is threat hunting. So I think we need to continue on with this topic, but I think that's a topic for another day, right? If we agree, and we clap in the standing ovation, I would stand, but
yes,
the camera's not big enough. So we continue on that. No, thank you, Cydney. Thank you, Rahul. And thank you for everybody tuning in. Right? And Russ, what do we like to talk about to end off every show?
Create an incident response plan. Thank you.
That's all that we ask.
That's all we ask.
That's it. That's all we're asking for.
Yeah, that's all we ask. There's one thing you do, takeaway is that. And also the side quest. So keep on side questing, keep on having fun. And a happy Monday while you're at it. So till next time, I would say goodbye and so long. Have a good one.
Take care.